They put a task on Airtasker saying, I'll pay you $1,000 to build an Airtasker clone. It was nearly a rite of passage for new employees at Airtasker to see this sort of copycat clone pop up, sometimes on our own platform. And they'd write to me or to the CEO really alarmed saying, oh, there's this new competitor, are you worried about them? And I was like, without wanting to be arrogant, they have no idea what it took to build this business. Having a website that has some listings and basic chat tooling is not even 1% of it.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode, in-depth masterclasses about the concepts essential to building, running, and investing in Silicon Valley-style startups. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into the principles that power high-growth disruption, the same way Facebook, Google, and Uber do it. The conversation starts now.
Have we started the episode?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
This is the drunk version of the Startup Podcast.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
Hi, I'm Henry Innis.
And I'm Chris Saad.
And in today's episode, we're going to discuss the pitch deck mistakes that are stopping you from getting funded. Sometimes it can feel like experienced founders have this secret language, the right vocabulary, the right way of saying things that gives them the fast lane to getting funded. Today, we're going to talk about what those secrets are and why they're really habits of thought and ways of thinking about your startup that signal to investors that you know what you're talking about. If you are looking to raise capital or even just understand your own startup better, this episode is not one to be missed. We can't wait to get into it with our very special guests right after this break. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. Just before we bust into it, I wanted to remind you all about the Startup Podcast Pact. If you're a regular listener of TSP and get value from it, we only ask this one thing from you. We would like you to rate and review us in your listening app. Subscribe to us on YouTube and give us a shout out on LinkedIn or wherever it is that you have your own following. This helps us grow the show, get in front of more founders, help more people, and continue doing what we're doing. All right, let's get into it.
I mean, the first one I learned is the word developer is very different from the word engineer.
Well, and the word IT, right? So that was one of the...
Yeah, I remember someone saying, we should talk about the IT project. I don't think we should describe it that way. I think you should be pretty careful about that because it sounds like you're selling printers, not building software.
Yeah, so let's draw a fine point on this, right? So if you're not from tech, you're not from building startups, you're for very traditional markets, old school business, it's really easy to call your engineering team, the IT team, or your engineering project, you're developing software, you call it like our IT build. This is not IT. IT is computers, printers, monitors, networks, information technology. What we're talking about in, venture scale startups and the Startup Podcast is tech, software, engineering, not IT. That's a really important difference. And this is stuff that's really important that can lose you credibility points in the room, right? And things that are worth knowing and also worth just having a little bit of a laugh about between us, I think. Not in a mean spirit, but in a way to make the subject light and fun.
Oh, for sure.
So IT, I think, is the first stylistic cardinal sin. By the way, this is all inspired by a post I wrote on LinkedIn, and Henry, you replied and said, oh my God, I made all of these mistakes. So we'll talk about those plus a few more.
But let's also dive in a little bit about the why, actually, just before we go past IT. But a lot of this is just sort of signaling, yes, but why do we not talk about IT when we talk about this stuff? It's because IT has a history as being a cost center, right? If you look at big businesses, especially in the past, but even today, it's like IT is something you spend money on, and you spend as little money on as possible to make sure, your internet is up and everyone has a computer at their desk and the printers work and all of that sort of stuff. It's not strategic. It's not a profit center. It's a cost center. And so when you start talking about building your tech company where the information technology, the building of software is actually your core product build, it is your core profit center, and then you still refer to it as IT, there's this sort of cognitive dissonance. It's like, do you understand when you talk about IT that you're actually centering your company around building software, and therefore you need to think of it in a completely different way?
Yeah, but most of the time, right, IT is buying software off the shelf. They're deploying software, they're managing software, and they're, working a lot in hardware and configuration. They're not building world-class software. And IT departments that try to do that generally shit the bed. And so it not only is it not a profit center, it's not the function of IT. That's not what IT does as a department, as a kind of a historical thing that they do. And so it's just a very different function between managing your IT systems and building an engineering team.
I think it's coming back to the main topic, right? Like, I remember coming in, there's just so many mistakes that you make about the style of how you present things coming into, VC and stuff like that. And when VCs have to deal with probably 1,000 meetings a year, I mean, it must be something like that. It's pretty easy to get written off just for small things that kind of trigger the wrong response, I feel. Like, and early on, like, I really felt that. I can tell, I'll tell you this really funny story. So when you're in an advertising agency, like, you have very long pitch decks, right? Like, the pitch decks are designed to tell a really long story. It's all built around trying to build someone up narratively to an idea. Like, I remember one of my first VC pitches with a guy called Jethro Cohen at Swepeg. I think the pitch deck was like 50 pages long. Not joking. And we're like taking through this like narrative arc of the industry. And it was honestly like, Jethro was really nice about it, but it basically burned us over there for like 6 months. Like, we wouldn't have even been able to have a conversation after that, just because like it just wasn't a credible deck. And like, I never even knew that kind of signal that like, if you cannot communicate your idea concisely and clearly, you probably don't have a clear articulation of the idea. And so that's a really clear signal that you're not able to like communicate strategy clearly, communicate ideas clearly, to be able to package things up clearly. And so therefore you would struggle to communicate and articulate strategy both to employees and kind of the wider VC market. And it was just like, it's one of those heuristics that I wish I'd known. Like, if you're a BCG consultant starting out, you probably have like a 50-page analysis just on your competitors, right? But actually that's hugely like signaling to a VC that you're not a startup person.
Yeah, I mean, my first startup, I wrote a 50-page business plan with like detailed strategy of what we're going to do and when we're going to do it and how we're going to do it. And yeah, big fail, right? Okay, so we've got 2 so far under our belt here. We've got IT, and we've got, 50-page documents describing your plan for VC. Bad. You want a 10, 12 slide pitch deck. You want to talk about engineering, not IT. The other one that I picked out was, people who are raising money to complete their software, or, so we're just raising money to complete our software and launch, which is, just a disaster stylistically and conceptually, right? You should be working on your thing and you should have momentum. You should be on your way to launch whether you raise the money or not. Just launch the thing. You should be raising money to be growing the business, to be hitting certain milestones, to accelerate your growth. But the idea that you're kind of frozen in place, waiting for someone to give you $1 in order to complete your software and launch is in a yellow to red flag.
I think we can somewhat divide these into 2 different categories, these different mistakes. One is pure stylistic, right? It's signaling that you're an insider, that you come from this industry. And, I think IT build is maybe one of them, or even, referring to engineers instead of developers makes you more elite somehow. But, that's purely stylistic. But then there are other ones where you are betraying a misunderstanding of what it takes to be successful at building a startup.
Totally agree.
And I think this is one of those. We're like, oh, okay, if you think that what you're going to do is raise a bunch of money, then just build your software and then complete building your software and then you're done. And, you're not going to have any iteration or learning along the way. You're not going to be continuing to build it. Then you're going to have a bad time. As an investor, that's a negative signal because you're like, okay, this person doesn't understand how building software in the 21st century works. And so it's a bad investment. It's not just that, oh, okay, they're signaling themselves as not being an insider. They're signaling an ignorance of one of the fundamental aspects of what makes this business work. And I think that's quite different.
The word complete there is the greatest sin, right? It's like, what? Wait, do you think your software is going to be complete? I'm sorry, what? This is related to another one I have here, which is founders who talk about like, oh yeah, we've done all this with no marketing. I really struggle with that. And that's really not a good signal because like, hang on, If you have any growth at all, you've done some kind of marketing, even if it's founder marketing, communicating to people you know in your network and so on. So it's a misunderstanding about what marketing is. And secondly, why haven't you done marketing? Like, why are you not growing? Why are you not prioritizing growth? You haven't understood how to acquire customers, how to do that deterministically. You haven't done a lot of the things that are de-risking and understanding how to grow your thing, and therefore started to uncover things like your unit economics and what does it take to grow this thing. And so not having done marketing is not a badge of honor. It's a thing you've missed or a thing you misunderstand. Go do some marketing. Go figure out how to grow your thing.
I think it's a really funny one when people take pride in like a founder-led sales model, because what that actually tells everybody is a non-repeatable sales model exists. And I think like that's acceptable at a seed stage, maybe, but you've got to have a pathway to have repeatable and scalable sales. The reality is like, at least in my world, in enterprise sales, beyond 20 sales, it's basically impossible to have a founder-led sales model. In fact, it is impossible.
But even worse than founder-led sales, Henry, is founder-led marketing, right? Which is sort of what we're talking about here, where it's like, oh, I've sold this thing to all my friends. It's like, I haven't spent anything on marketing. And it's funny. This is one of the rare cases where the better connected you are in the ecosystem, the more you can fool yourself. Because if you know every founder out there, you can actually get your first few $100,000 of revenue without any marketing, because the marketing is really just you talking to your friends. But then at some point, what that means is, yes, you hit the ceiling and then you have nowhere to go from there. You have no idea how to reach new people. You have no idea if those new people even want your thing. All you know is that your founder friends like it.
And this episode is really more about style than substance. And so what we're really saying about this is, you shouldn't be wearing founder-led sales as a badge of honor, right? You should be saying, hey, we're still at founder-led sales. We're close to finding product market fit and a fit for our pitch. And we're now starting to rotate to growing our sales team. So it's not a badge, it's a stage. It's a thing you need to speak with the right level of pragmatism and clear-eyed sense that, hey, we haven't figured that part out yet and we're working on it.
Yeah, but Chris, it's actually a head fake, because what we're saying here, or nearly uncovering as we go, is that most of these so-called stylistic issues are issues because they betray a lack of understanding or a gap that is actually problematic, right? So
yes, yeah,
so
absolutely.
it's more that these things are tells. These stylistic issues are tells of an underlying problem in how the founder is thinking about building their startup. And that's why investors see them as at least yellow flags.
Yeah, well, here's another one. So I've started seeing a lot of people reach out to me about, hey, Chris, we're looking for financial partners. And I'm always thinking, like, what the hell is a financial partner? Is that like, I don't know,
We're opening a joint bank account together. Yay!
Yeah. And of course, what they're talking about is an investor. They're looking for an investor, an angel investor, a family office, a VC. Understand the game you're playing and the vocabulary of that game. They're not called financial partners. They're called investors. And in fact, while many investors would like to think of themselves as your partners, or they present themselves as, oh, we partner with founders and we really are founder friendly. At the end of the day, it's up to you to deliver. They're putting the capital in. They might be opening their Rolodex or being available to take a call and give you some advice. Maybe they're on your board, but they're not your partner in the traditional sense of like taking a massive stake in the company and now all of a sudden they're helping to make everyday decisions with you. It's not a 50-50 partnership like traditional business. They're taking a minority stake. They're giving you typically a large amount of capital. They're helpful when you call, but they're your investors. And that's so it's a stylistic thing, but to your point, Yaniv, you're betraying a misunderstanding of the relationship between you and the investor.
Or you're just full of shit. I just wanted to quickly share a funny story. I got a cold inbound the other day from someone, who writes a newsletter, and they're like, we're currently looking for partners for your newsletter. Would you be interested in becoming a partner? And I wrote back and said, by partner, do you mean you want me to pay you for sponsorship? And yeah, strangely, they never replied to me. So I think that's, that's the full of shit case.
I've got a new one that's coming through a lot on LinkedIn at the moment. It's basically, join our advisory board, and we're also looking for advisory board people who will lead our seed round, which is, that's a very weird one. It's like, so that's one that comes through on LinkedIn a lot.
Yeah.
But I think to build on what you're looking for from an investor as well, like, I think it's very important to be clear on what your ask is. And again, like when you see kind of people come out and it's like, we're raising money, and it's like, they don't say how much and what they're using it for. That's a really clear stylistic kind of indicator that it's a bit problematic, right? And it's a bit challenging to go like, what does this business actually want? What does this business actually need? What's the purpose of the funds? Like, I was very lucky to have Charlie Gearside from Uke basically mentor me in all of this stuff and actually teach me how to do it. But I think it's very problematic when you don't have the ask clear. And if you don't have the ask clear, it just signals that you don't know what you want. And I think the number one thing is decisiveness in startups. And it's just like, that to me is a huge signal that the founder doesn't know.
Well, it's deeper than that, right? It's not just that you don't have the ask clear, you don't have the relationship clear, right? To broaden this out further, the word partners is one of the most overloaded words in tech and business in general, second only maybe to platform, right? And so it's like, we have partners, Chris. And I'm like, really, what kind of partners, right? And you just said this, Yaniv, we want you to partner with us on our newsletter. No, you're looking for sponsors, or you're looking for customers, or you're looking for distributors, are you looking for investors? Are you looking for joint venture partners? What kind of partner? Are you looking for vendors? Oftentimes they're looking for vendors, right? Stop using the word partner entirely. Just stop it. Stop using the word partner. You, at the very least, add a qualifying word to the beginning, right? Distribution partner. Just find a better word. And often the word is actually customer. That's the word. And so, focus in on what you're doing.
I think to flip it for a second, I'd love investors stop calling themselves platforms. Like you're an investor, you're not a platform.
Yeah.
You're a platform for giving me money.
I'm a developer platform guy. I love platforms, but the overuse of the word platform drives me nuts. If you have a single point solution that's solving one particular thing, you have a tool. Maybe you have a marketplace. Maybe you have a SaaS product. You only have a platform if other people are standing on top of you to build yet other different businesses. That's when you have a platform. And even then, just, be more precise and specific in your language.
But just to go back a bit on the partner thing, Chris, like I think Henry's got the right analysis here, which is quite often this use of the word partner doesn't come from a misunderstanding. It comes from this reluctance to be clear about what you're asking for, right? And I think especially asking for money, people are weird about it. So like, I'm not asking you to give me money. I'm asking you to be my partner. But it goes broader than that, right? Where people haven't done the work to really figure out what they're asking for, and then they don't have the courage and the straightforwardness to simply ask for that thing. That is a negative sign, because if you don't know how to ask for things, first of all, you're making your investors do more work, but it's a negative signal. It's a signal that as a founder, you need to be good at being very specific and clear and precise and being able to do the analysis and understand your needs. And if you're not doing that, when you're raising funds, where else are you not doing it? And I think that's the problem.
Well, this is related to the next one I had here, which is we're raising up to X million dollars, which is a stylistic thing betraying a substance thing, right? Up to X million dollars. How much is it? How much are you raising? Is it 2 million? Is it 2.1? Is it 2.5? And I've also see, for 12 months, which is obviously, we've talked about this a lot. You want to be raising for 18 months minimum. And so figure out how much you're raising, ask for it clearly, understand the relationship that you're engaging in. These are all really, really bad signals.
Being clear about the runway too is a very important stylistic thing. I think as you're raising and you have your use of funds, being explicit about the runway and we're raising to generate 18 months runway to achieve X growth milestones in order to put the business in a position to have optionality to do A or B. It actually gives an investor a lot of confidence that, you're thinking in a disciplined way about planning.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
We started this episode off as, hey, this is just going to be a fun and nitpicking language. But what's been obvious, since very early in the recording is this is not just style. It's style that betrays poor thinking, poor clarity, poor specificity, lack of experience, really. These are all yellow flags that are actually more important than they might appear on the surface.
And actually, in that sense, I did want to just stay a little bit with the round sizing thing a bit, because it's something that's on my mind a lot at the moment. It's a bugbear of mine where founders go out to raise and they don't have a clear idea of how much they're going to raise. This is what you're saying, Henry, how much they need to raise. This can go wrong in multiple different ways. I think during 2021, during ZERP, founders raised way too much. If they're really disciplined, that can be okay. But usually what it leads to is waste and bloat, and then a reckoning that a lot of startups have unfortunately had to face. Now what I'm seeing is people raising too little. And why do they raise too little? Because they may have actually figured out how much they need, but they don't have the confidence that they can raise that much. So they're going to raise less. I was speaking to a really experienced investor the other day, and they were talking about bridge rounds specifically. A bridge round is we saying, oh, we're running out of money and we just need a bit more money before we raise our next round. And this person said, when we are asked for a bridge round, we want to make sure it's not a bridge to nowhere, right? In other words, you need enough building material to get to the other side, to build the whole bridge. In a way, you can actually think of every VC round until you reach profitability or cash flow break even as a bridge round, in a sense, right? You're building that bridge to the next round, to the next milestone. If you raise too little, you're going to run out of building material and you're fucked. And that's when you need to raise the actual bridge rounds and so on. And so the idea that you will let investors dictate how much you need to raise is a sign that you don't have a solid plan and you don't have the confidence of your convictions. You should decide based on a good, sober, thoughtful analysis how much you need to raise. And then you just got to stick to your guns on that. That's the only real option of how to raise well.
Yeah, I think there's one exception to that, which is like when you're looking at a variable growth rate. So I'll give you a worked example. I can work a 36 runway plan for Mutinex, either growing at like 300% a year, and I can do that with like pretty repeatable data at the moment over a 3-year period. Or I can kind of look at one going at like a much slower kind of 125% growth type plan because it's mostly variable cost, right? So it's like how much I'm willing to put in at the front dictates how much will happen at the back. And it's really just the growth profile I want will dictate the amount that I raise, and I've got to make that as a dilution choice, and that will somewhat be dictated by pricing in the market. But it's probably, a slightly later stage decision that you kind of talk like that and think like that. But definitely something I've experienced that you can have a range, but you have to look at it from a variable cost perspective.
Okay, of course you're right, and that's very sophisticated. Also, what you're saying is, yes, okay, I'm being too reductive here, but when you have that range, the range is really well thought out, right? It's not just like up to, it's like, it could be 10 million, in which case, it implies this growth rate, or it could be 20 million. With 20 million, we could do that. It's more like we've got a menu of options here for investors, and, the market, they may choose one or the other of them. But you're not just being like, oh yeah, just whatever amount you're willing to give us.
A financial model even, Yaniv, a financial model.
The next stylistic thing we wanted to talk about was innovative and revolutionary. We have an innovative and revolutionary product, guys. It's going to be awesome.
Okay, if founders can just seriously stop describing every product in junk jargon, it would be fantastic. Like, I seriously have a strong view on this at the moment. Speak to it through your unit economics, the problem that you're solving, and whether or not you can demonstrate it in the product. That is the absolutely critical thing founders need to do. If you need to rely on broad, verbose, dumb adjectives to describe your idea, maybe your idea is just really verbose and dumb, and don't do it.
Yeah, I've talked about this on the show before, but when I was young and immature, both in age and in startups, I love these big creative words and grandiose statements and claims. The older I get and the more mature I get with this stuff is like, the more I'm just looking for the clearest, most pragmatic, most concise thing I can possibly say. I will often just try to even just avoid adjectives entirely. Just make it very, very clear. What do you do, for who, and why?
People who describe things simply, I really think just give off a first principles vibe, and you just get a sense that they can problem solve better. Like, I don't know what it is, but if somebody can describe do X to achieve Y, which gets me to Z, and they can lay out a logical train of thought clearly, and that just shines through in what they do, and you can kind of follow their logic. Description by analogy, which is what using words like revolution and stuff like that, it means that in order to excite you, I have to excite you by making you think of something else. Rather than description by first principle is like, I'm able to excite you by following my train of logic. And I think that's just a very different emotional feeling for people who get excited by ideas. If you get excited by the train of thought and logic, it's a far more compelling place to be than getting excited by a comparison to something else or being made to think about something
Yeah.
else.
And there's this thing called the Feynman technique that was proposed by the Nobel Prize winner and sometimes referred to as the smartest man on earth, Richard Feynman. And he said, basically, if you want to show that you really understand something, explain it to a sixth grader, right? That the proof point, the way of making sure you have that knowledge is to be able to explain it simply and clearly. And so I think that's really what you're saying, Hen. Like, yes, to show that you really understand your startup and what you're trying to do, use that simple language. It shows that you understand it. It shows that first principles thinking. And that's so important. I would also just add quickly on like innovative and revolutionary is they're empty words, right? This is show, don't tell. I don't think, Chris, that it's the case that you shouldn't necessarily paint a big picture for what it is that you're trying to do, but do it directly. Say, this is what we're building, and let potential investors draw their own conclusion about whether it's revolutionary or innovative. You don't want to say it. It's like calling yourself sexy. Like I wait for other people to call me sexy. I'm still waiting, but let other people figure that out.
The people who I find most credible, especially out here in Silicon Valley, is when they talk in terms of discovery. So when they say something like, hey, it turns out that people X have problem Y, and we figured out if we do Z, ABC improves by 20%. And what that suggests to me is like, it's not a hypothesis they have or something they made up or something they wish to be true. They're saying like, it turns out, meaning we went and checked. We went and found out. And actually, we're very clear-eyed about this thing. And here's precisely how the mechanics of it work. As soon as somebody starts talking like that out here, I'm like, oh yeah, this guy gets it. They've actually dug into a real problem. It's amazing how the vocabulary betrays your thinking.
Can I just say a really funny story
Yes,
here?
please.
Like, this was my first pitch deck. The Mutiny Master Plan. Change how marketing investments made globally from soft metrics to hard revenue metrics. Use that credibility to empower marketers to fund better media based on trust. Rebuild media as an investment, investing in quality assets rather than quantity of assets. 5. Media operates as an efficient consumer market, not a distorted reach market. Re-establish marketing's credibility as a profession. Like, that is just like an example of like waffle, garbage, awful.
I was going to say that's actually better than average.
That's not too terrible. You're showing a chain of reasoning that actually ladders up to, that's not too bad.
Yeah, well, I just think though, it's just got like no actionable steps to achieving it,
Right. I mean, well, but it probably has one too many adjectives, creative adjectives in it. But you are showing a chain of reasoning, I think, where you're saying like, we're going to start here, which will then achieve this, which will then achieve that. That's a kind of a very high level plan. That's not as bad as I've seen.
Also, I realize now in this pitch deck, I left all the Lorem Ipsum slides at the back and I sent it to SquarePeg. Whoops.
So the next cardinal sin, the next stylistic sin we have here is we have no competition. This is a good one. If you don't have any competition, then maybe what you're doing isn't a real problem. And possibly you're not thinking hard enough, right? So even if your users currently use spreadsheets or currently muddle around with docs and what have you, there is someone somewhere doing something in the category, in the problem domain of what you're doing. At the very least, your competition is the status quo. But if there is truly no competition, what you're saying is this place is unvalidated, so you need to be careful, or you have not done a good Google search and you need to look a little harder. And especially if the VC is aware of your competition and you haven't listed them, that is like the worst of all possible scenarios where they're like, dude, I can name 3 companies that are your competition right now. So you haven't looked hard enough.
A close relative of we have no competition is you have a competitor's slide and you use that classic Gartner sort of four square where like the bottom left is like the really crap stuff and the top right is the really good stuff. And you put all your competitors like in the bottom left or the top left or whatever. And then you're off on your own, by far the best product on every axis of this matrix. So it's sort of like saying it's disrespecting the competition. It's saying we are way better than our competition. And that may be true. I'm betting it's not. And so like, to me, that is lazy thinking once again.
I think there's a really useful heuristic here to think through. Founders in general, we've got to be slightly delusional in order to be successful. So sometimes it's actually hard to think of competition just by virtue of the personality trait. I think a very useful heuristic that I've started to use myself, and I wish I'd had earlier, is who do you take market share from and who do you lose market share to? It's a very useful way to describe it because who you're taking market share from, if you're able to articulate that and describe that, it also helps you to articulate and describe the market that you operate in, I think, in a far more effective way.
Yeah. And also deciding who your competition is extremely important, right? There's this classic case study of where the new CEO at Coca-Cola said, our competition is not Pepsi. Our competition is water. That is actually a very important revelation for the company, because it means we're not just trying to be where Pepsi is. We're not just trying to take market share from kind of this scarce little pocket of people who drink cola. We're trying to be wherever water is. And so that led to like the vending machine strategy and putting a Coke next to basically every water faucet to make Coke as accessible as water. That's just a really clear example of how understanding your competition is also understanding your product framing and positioning and marketing and everything. Yeah, it's really important you know who your competition is. And it's really important to know that just because certain companies aren't doing what you're doing yet, that's possibly not a deficiency on their part. That is an example of great discipline and focus. It's only a matter of time until they add that thing to their portfolio. So that's another thing that I watch out for a lot with founders is like, oh yeah, these guys have been around for a couple of years and they still don't do what we do. We want to do everything they do, plus all of these other things. And often I remind them, hey, they're not stupid. They're not doing it yet because they're being disciplined about what they are doing. And when they're ready, they're going to turn their attention to that thing. Be aware of that possibility. And that's a very important thing to know. All right, another big sin, a stylistic sin that people often have is this can do anything or anyone can use this, which again is betraying the fact that you don't have a specific enough problem, vision, persona, customer, market mapped out. There's a lack of specificity, as we've been talking about in a few of these things.
I think this sort of fits with some of the others, right? It's nearly like you're underestimating how difficult all of this is. We don't have any competition. We're innovative and revolutionary. We don't have a specific financial capital need in this raise. We don't need to do marketing. It's like there's nearly an implicit arrogance, one that you probably don't realize you have when you're saying things like this. If you build something for everyone, 99.9% of the time, you've built something for no one. And, all you've said is we haven't put the thought into having a proper persona that we're targeting, or a proper use case that we're targeting. And yes, there are exceptions, but assume you're not one of them.
I think most of the time it's not arrogance. It's a lack of understanding about how hard it is to build things and to move markets and change behaviors. So it's often, I think, ignorance, not arrogance. It's people who don't know the real cost and complexity and effort required to build things, and specificity and focus and discipline. And so, yeah, I think it's people who are struggling to understand that and they don't know what they don't know.
Building is really freaking hard.
Yeah.
Like, this is just what everybody underestimates. If I was to take a theme out of this, the single biggest thing I have learned in the 5 years that we've been building Mutinex, and, hopefully we'll be building for many, many more years now, is that high clarity of thought is the number one superpower that a founder can have. What you do versus what you don't do. Communicating clearly to rally teams around to objectives, being able to actually bring people together to achieve a highly specific objective and influence it in a way that's executed well. High clarity is the way that you get through those early years where you have basically, structured chaos, and clarity of thought is the only thing that brings order to that chaos. And so I think it's kind of funny that pretty much all of the stylistic issues reflect a lack of clarity of thought, which probably reflects a huge strategic risk in the company as to what it would take in order to execute this well. And if you don't have clarity of thought, it's highly unlikely that you'll actually be able to succeed and build. And so I think that's what I kind of took from this. Like, listening to all of these, it's like, actually, this is about clarity and clarity of thought.
You actually made me think of a last one here, which is people who go, oh, I don't know why they spent so many millions of dollars on the website. I could build that for half the price. And what are they spending all that money on? And it's just not understanding what it takes to build customer support and sales and business development and product marketing and design and, engineering. And like, they just don't understand what it takes to build a business instead of an app. So this is another example of ignorance.
Funny story about that. So I used to work at Airtasker, which is a online task marketplace. And there was this funny thing that happened where they'd be like, Airtasker charges too many fees. And so they put a task on Airtasker saying, I'll pay you $1,000 to build an Airtasker clone. It's just a website. It's just a simple listing. And someone would offer to build it. And it was nearly a rite of passage for new employees at Airtasker to see this sort of copycat clone pop up, sometimes on our own platform. And they'd write to me or to the CEO really alarmed saying, oh, there's this new competitor, are you worried about them? And I was like, without wanting to be arrogant, they have no idea what it took to build this business. Having a website that has some listings and basic chat tooling is not even 1% of it. And so, yeah, I think that's a good point, Henry. One thing I thought would be maybe a good place to finish, you talked a little bit about your journey implicitly, Henry, where you started off, with your terrible, according to you, 50-page pitch deck. You've, I believe, now raised 3 rounds quite successfully. And so you obviously went on a learning journey and were able to turn this around and become somewhat of a good pitcher to investors. So if there are folks listening here and they're trying to figure out how to go on their own journey to be able to use the right language in the right way, think the right way, to our point, like what's some of your advice that you would give?
Listen to the Startup Podcast. Come on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
listen to the Startup Podcast. I think there's a few things I would do. Firstly, I would talk to other founders. That was the thing that was a huge accelerant to me. Like, I spoke to a guy called Charlie Gearside who helped me immensely early on. Met him off Twitter. Shout out to Charlie.
Love you,
for
Charlie.
giving up his time for some random bloke on Twitter. So that was a really good experience to me. So I think talking to other founders gets you a little bit more in the sense, going to startup events and stuff like that. That's something I wish I'd done a lot more early on, is engage with the startup community, because it would have at least given me a flavor for that a little bit more. I think the second thing is, I think decks are a trap for clear thinking. Like, I think you should be able to write out the narrative of your business on a page and then get it into a deck. And I think that's what forces clear thinking. And then I would go through the steps of your business and really, like, when I got good at this, I kept being able to pressure test my own thinking continuously. So I kept being able to go, okay, why is that true? Go the level down. Why is that true? Go the level down. And so if you keep asking yourself why about something, like if I say like, oh, we're going to be successful because we have a good go-to-market. Why? Oh, because we're going to be really good at acquiring customers. Why? Because we're going to be in these channels. Why? So I think asking why repeatedly was very, very good for me. And then I think finally, read books about capital allocation, about how to allocate capital effectively, about how to run a business, how to run a P&L, how to do those basic things, because the fundamental job of you at early stage, when you have incredibly constrained resources, is allocating capital in a manner that's far more efficient and effective than anybody else, and rallying that capital towards executing a product vision that people will buy. That is effectively your job. And so you have to get really good at understanding that, in my view. If you're good at understanding that, it's very easy to go to the next round and say, well, I need capital to do X, Y, and Z. I've been allocating capital like this. This is where I think I can get it to. And so I think just building those patterns of thought and execution into your day-to-day, I've gotten a lot better at pitching because my business is a much better run. And I think because my business is more effectively run today than it was 3 to 4 years ago, my clarity of thought is naturally much, much higher. And so when it comes to like doing a capital raise process at the moment, we had an amazing data room, got lots of comments on it. It was much quicker for me to pull together that amazing high quality room than it was pulling together my first pitch deck 3 years ago. Like, it took me like a week versus the heaps and heaps of time I spent trying to refine like 150-page deck ages ago. So this is really interesting. I think like your clarity of thought to a degree reflects your clarity on paper too.
Yeah. And of course, Amazon is famous for banning decks in all of their internal presentations. They have the 6-pager format, and they're very much fans of the prose spoken word. Why? Precisely for the reasons you said, Henry, that it shows a clarity of thinking. And I actually had a friend of mine in biotech, and she sent me a pitch doc. And at first I was like, oh, okay. But then I read it. I was like, this is actually way better than a deck, because she articulated her thoughts clearly, which is actually, there's nowhere to hide when you do it in prose. So I think, even if in software, I think there's a very strong convention that pitches are in a sort of PowerPoint type format, it's probably a really good exercise to write it down in words first and see if you can tell the story clearly before you translate it into slides.
Yaniv, you just mentioned a stylistic thing that bugs the shit out of me.
Ooh.
PowerPoint. Stop using PowerPoint. Start using Google Docs.
Well, okay. Well, that's just snobbery. Look, I think this is a good place to stop. I think it's ended up being a much more profound episode than we imagined. Like you said, we thought we would have a bit of fun talking about some of the stylistic mistakes, and we concluded with the importance of clarity of thought and how that results in expressing yourself clearly in the end. And so the really important thing is that clarity of thought, and then the communication comes second. Henry, like you said, surround yourself with other founders, with mentors. and with people who've really done it before. Now, Chris, I know getting to that clarity of thought and communicating clearly, that's one of the things that you're really passionate about. So if founders want to work with you on that, how can they do that?
Yeah, that's right, Yaniv. My passion is helping founders skip all the mistakes Henry's made and the hard lessons he had to learn the hard way, and just fast forward to the best clarity of thinking, the best vocabulary, the best outcomes as quickly as possible. So you can learn more about that over at chrissaad.com/advisory, or you can subscribe to my newsletter at chrissaad.com/newsletter. Henry, how can people find you?
People can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or generally being opinionated at a bar in Sydney.
And of course, your startup, Mutinex.co.
Yeah, so it's Mutinex.co. We're always looking for amazing data scientists. We're always looking for amazing people. And of course, if you're a marketer listening to this and you want to actually know what your marketing's doing, please let us know.
And Yaniv, how about you?
I am known to hang out on LinkedIn trying to make it a little bit less boring, and I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. So if you want to follow my content, send me a connection request, let me know you're from TSP, and I'd love to have you in my network. Thanks for coming on, Henry. That was a lot of fun.
All right, guys, great chat. Talk soon.
All right, thanks a lot. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.